Hello, I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like. The purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues. Those issues often revolve around Bible theology and other matters related to that, such as philosophy and politics. Today, I want to address the topic, a deconversion issue, of how one should look at the Bible. And this has often been a controversial subject among atheists because some atheists will look at the Bible and go, yeah, it's all mythology, it's all garbage, we need to get rid of it. And others will say, yeah, except we don't just toss out other books of mythology. We look at them for their historical, cultural value for the time. We look at them for clues for other historical stuff that we can study. And as it turns out, there are certain things in the biblical history that are true. Now, there's some things that are patently false and can't be supported by archaeology. But I was watching a video Holy Cooley produced about where the Israelites really came from based on archaeology, where the Israelite religion, where Judaism comes from. And I'll link it above my head right now, but it's a longer video, but I think it's well worth your time because it's an interview with somebody who actually has studied this in historical context. And he basically says, yeah, we still use the Bible, but we don't use it as a basis for absolute truth. What we do is we look at the historical events portrayed in it and say, well, is there any evidence for that? And if there is, then that can lead to other historical finds. Now, why is this a deconversion issue? Because there's an emotional discharge when you leave your faith of wanting to get rid of everything that involves faith. And I think gets sometimes, that's simple, like I talked about last week with symbolism. It can get more complicated by trying to just get rid of all the literature that you have in your house. It's Christian or Muslim or whatever. But one of the things that you have to caution yourself about, like I am a biblical scholar and I'm a theological scholar. Now that really, somebody says, well, what good is that as an atheist? Well, for instance, Paul Gia did a video. He's been in a conflict with various scholars about his theory about how Christianity might have really happened, and he's been in bigger conflict about how many people actually saw the resurrected Jesus that we actually have confirmed testimony for. I would agree with him that the only person that has quote unquote seen the resurrection Jesus and claimed to do so was the Apostle Paul. Everybody else is kind of just, there's an assumption about it. We do know that some of these apostles did exist, but it's a lot shorter list than the whole 12, plus James and, a bunch of other, James and Paul and a few others. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because as an atheist, I don't dismiss the Bible. I'm just very, very critical of it. I'm very critical of its claims. And that's a big difference because I'm not just throwing it out. I'm not just getting rid of it. Now, it gives me an advantage. Like, for instance, in the whole conflict with Paul Gia, one of the doctors, I can't remember who, mentioned the idea, well, there's not even atheist biblical scholars that buy this. Now, I want to go into a little bit about biblical scholarship here. Well, and my response to that would have been, if I was the one being attacked, well, so of course not. The vast majority of people that go into biblical scholarship are already Christians. Okay, I got my degree in Bible because I was a Christian at the time and I wanted to learn more about the Bible. I mean, it's not there's not any rocket science to us. I was thinking of going into the ministry, so I'm going to need to have this valuable tool in my arsenal and know how to use it better. Over time, it just led to more and more questions than the Bible could answer, which kind of indicates a lot of things about it. But you continue to move on. Now, if Apologia were to contact me, if you ever see this video, Apologia, dude, I am an atheist and I am a biblical scholar. I actually more of a theologian. But I find your theory about how Christianity could have started simply with Peter and Paul and just a bunch of people that were engaged in wishful thinking. And you only need, a couple of people to actually have hallucinogenic experiences. As a former Pentecostal, I used to see this all the time, where somebody would claim to have had a miracle. And lo and behold, the next week, 6 or 7 people have claims of miracles. This miracle that happened to one person, oh yeah, I saw that too. And it's like, I know how this works because people will fabricate stories because there's a spiritual pride about it. They don't want to give up that pride. And so I absolutely understand why that would happen. And I find Apologia's theory on it very intriguing. I'll post that one over my head too, because I think he's really hitting home that he actually knows something about the Bible. They have tried to dismiss him. I know that he's onto something, because the scholars who have spent their life's work now feel threatened by him because they attacked him personally. Okay. It's like, okay, even if your personal attacks were true, the argument still stands and you still have to deal with the argument. And, this has been a back and forth thing for a couple of weeks now. And Apologia is like, I got to move on. And the apologists, this is why I hated apologetics, even as a Christian, because I thought it was lowbrow. It was stuff that had been debunked several times. You also had the issue of the fact that a lot of scholars are Christians. So the claim that biblical scholarship claims something isn't really a big claim because it's never really subject to the kind of criticism that an atheist would give it. And so, you just kind of have this echo chamber in Christian scholarship. And they never really deal with the actual critics and what they're saying, and they never really engage in that discussion. So it causes me to look at my Bible as a little bit more of a scholarly work that I have some good knowledge of. And, Apologia, if you need a scholarly backer to your theory, I'll back you. Now, like you, I simply look at it as one possible theory of how Christianity started. And I think it's a really damn good one, don't get me wrong. But you're right, and I would echo, this is not something that you can just say there might not be other theories that would work equally as well. The biggest difference between you, me, and every other atheist out there that wants to propose a theory of how Christianity started is that we're not going to take the Word of God as our starting point and have to try to prove it. We're going to look at all the different ways that religions have started and realize that maybe, just maybe, there's a much more down-to-earth reason why this, thing happened. My personal theory is more along the lines of that Jesus may have very well been a real person. I take more of a growing legend, tall tale kind of view of Jesus. The earliest records we have of him are the recording of his teachings. It's a natural question to ask those people who wrote down the teachings of Jesus Christ, well, what was he like? What kind of person was he? And then you get these first early attempts at doing some biography. Mark probably marks the first real significant attempt. And Mark's Jesus is really low-key. He's not all that exciting. But he does miracles. He predicted his death and resurrection. Things happen, but there is no resurrection story in Mark, and there's no birth narrative in Mark. And then Luke and Matthew add those, and they're different. And the resurrection stories gets really different. Then, John throws his 2 cents in, and John's Jesus is off the chain. He's just like super Jesus. He is a superhero by every definition. And so that's kind of how I look at the story of Jesus. Well, how did Christianity arrive? I think Christianity's origin may have a much simpler origin in that you have certain people like the Apostle Paul and a few others that we can actually attest to their existence. Now, at that point, you have to really kind of look at it and say, well, okay, but what did they really say and what did they really believe? Now, Paul, I think, was a genuine devout believer. And I think Paul has more responsibility in starting the religion known as Christianity than any other person. But it doesn't take much. It just, there's no claims, from a lot of these apostles that Jesus had risen from the dead. There's an attestation. People say, well, your Tall Tale of Jesus series, isn't that about, proving that there really wasn't, the Gospels don't stand as 2 or 3 witnesses? Yeah. Every time I've sat down to a text, I can explain this as multiple witnesses that we have no idea who the hell they are. It's oral tradition combined with time and collusion, and that's what you get. But when it comes to the Acts of the Apostles, it's even worse because we only have one testimony, which fails the biblical criteria. None of the events in the book of Acts, for instance, are collaborated with any other book of the Bible. So it's kind of like, okie dokie. And Paul, writes about some of those events, but it gets confusing when Paul writes about it. It's like he's remembering it badly or remembering it wrongly. So that's kind of where you begin. Now, if you notice there, what I'm doing is being very critical of the text, something I would never have done before I deconverted. The reason I want to mention this is because there is an emotional attachment to the Bible that many people, Christians, have, especially if you come out of a fundamentalist, the Bible is the truth thing. And so it's very significant, in my opinion, in deconversion, when a person first is actually critical of the scriptures, when they're first critical of the Bible, it's a significant moment because it begins you down a path of critical thinking when you're looking at ancient literature. And that's kind of the way it is for me. Now, I have something I want to show that I don't think I've ever showed before. Maybe I have. This is my old preaching Bible. I don't know what else to call it. It's what it is. It's a New American Standard. I used to preach from this every Sunday. It was my favorite. It's got a little bit larger print because I'm getting old and can't see worth a shit as much as I used to. Although my doctor says my eye vision for reading is really, really good. I still have to find that sweet spot if some of you older people know what I'm talking about. But I used to hold that up, preach from it, open it up every Sunday and read a text and preach from it. And, it had a lot of significance for me when I still believed when I did that. I remember when I was first critical of the scripture was a little bit before I deconverted. And it had a significant effect on me and my viewpoint of the Bible. Now, my first gut reaction was like many atheists, which is, this is all garbage, I need to throw it away. I don't do that anymore. My real fundamental view of this book now is more along the lines of, this is a book of ancient mythology. This is a book of ancient cultures. There is some truth in here, but you got to really couple it with the archaeological evidence, couple it with other religious texts of the time, other histories and things of the time. You got to really look at the contemporaries to how the Bible was really, really produced. And then you can really discern some things out of it that may actually be factual and true. So I don't throw it all out. I'm just very skeptical. Like if I picked up Homer's Iliad, I would certainly be very skeptical of all the interventionists by the gods in that book. But, Troy did turn out to actually exist. Whether this war that took place between Troy and the Greeks actually took place, maybe yes, maybe no, don't know. It's like anything else in history. I don't look at it as any different than the Iliad. I don't look at it as different than the Havamal of Norse mythology. I don't look at it any differently than, some of the ancient Sumerian myths of the time. My point is this, that if you come out of the Bible is the truth tradition, that moment of deconversion that is really, really significant, or even pre-deconversion or post-deconversion, where you actually are critical of the Bible, is a very significant deconversion moment for you. You'll never be the same again. Once you've seen the fraud, once you've seen the problem, you can't unsee it. And that really happened for me. People ask me, well, what advantage, what text did you really see that? I said, the Exodus. I looked for historical documentation that was peer-reviewed about the Exodus. And what I discovered was there's absolutely no damn way that it could have happened. If you take any date that conservative Christian scholars apply to the Exodus, what you get is them fleeing from Egypt into Egypt, because Egypt owned the Levant at this time. In fact, they owned it from the time that Moses would have arrived until the forming of the supposed United Kingdom. They occupied that area for 200 and some years. There were no Canaanites there other than those that were under rule of Egypt. And so the more I looked at the archaeology, the more I looked at the problem. I said, there's no way the biblical story is true. It can't be true. It's got to be some sort of myth. And it's that moment that I can say that I suddenly realized that the Bible had a lot of problems. Now, I'd already noted some of the problems in the life of Christ, but now when I went back to the life of Christ, and those of you that know about that series probably can see it, I suddenly didn't look at it as the infallible story of Jesus. I began to look at it as embellished history, maybe at best, but more likely the historical Jesus was a much smaller figure if he existed at all. And what happened is that somebody took this small, insignificant person and blew it up. And Paul, seeing a vision of the resurrected Jesus, not actually resurrected Jesus himself, is all there. But I also want to, encourage people at this point to understand that emotionally, the attachment to this book that was so strong in me disappeared. And I think a lot of people that deconvert have that same feeling when they start looking at the Bible and realize, the claims of this book can't be proven. What claims can be proven from it is still a very interesting question, but it's just not as deep and rich as you think. Let me know what you think in the comments. I would appreciate some feedback on this question, or maybe a story of your deconversion where you looked at the Bible differently and realized that it was kind of garbage. I do want to deal with the comment of the week or of this video. So kind of a comment of the day. Paradise Found commented on my reaction letter I received from the Jehovah's Witnesses in part 1. He said, "You were wise to skirt around Revelation as a pastor. Pervasively growing up as a witness, it was by far the book that we spent the most time studying, to the extent that it collectively shaped an entire generation's nightmares. At its most coherent, it reads like a fever dream. If you're not reaching for supernatural inspiration as the explanation for it, then hallucinogenic plants or fungi is needed for the logical conclusion." I still, and I caught flack for that because I said LSD, but I'm like, it was a joke. But the thing I have to say about that is I very much think that some of what happened back then was about drugs. Okay. I really do. There was an interesting part of that video I mentioned with Holy Kool-Aid is, as an aside, one of the archaeological finds they had in Israel with the Israeli deities, which is an interesting thing to watch that video for, is that there is definitely evidence of marijuana use in some of these cultic locations. So you have to wonder what they were really seeing. This question comes up a lot. And, what are the people? Well, I think sometimes they were just high on natural drugs, and then they thought they saw something. And you make an excellent point. I appreciate that, because you mentioned something else in this comment that caught my interest, to the extent that it collectively shaped an entire generation's nightmares. Boy, isn't that true about Revelation as a book, of how it has really, really influenced us to create some really nightmarish visions of the future. But yeah, I can understand why they would spend a lot of time studying it, because they're trying to find the key that'll unlock its secrets. I don't think it has any secrets. I think it's a really poorly written, apocalyptic book that was designed to scare the shit out of people. And really, honestly, it was written for its time, not for our time. And quite frankly, I think after 480, its application to real life is pretty much lost. The more I read it, the more I think whoever the writer was making a commentary on the Roman Empire at the time. And that seems to be a little bit better. But thanks for the comment. Just a few parting words. I'm getting very close to 100 subscribers. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate your time and your effort. Putting this, every share and like is appreciated, and I appreciate all those. Just gets me noticed. And I'm getting very close, so I'm not really sure what I'm going to do that. I know that at 100 subscribers, I'm going to seriously look at a Patreon account. I'm seriously going to look at a PayPal system, maybe if you want to donate to the channel. I'm also looking at learning a few things to make my editing better. You may have noticed the background has shifted a little bit. That's because I got a new desk, and this desk is a little bit longer, so I'm slid out better, but I do like the way it looks behind me better. You can actually see the 9 noble virtues, and you can see the full Godfather and a few other things, my degree over my other shoulder. And one of the things that's coming up very soon is a frequently asked question video. Over the last year, I've gotten some questions that have been frequently asked questions, but about me personally, and I've answered them as best I can. But I think going forward, because I am getting more subscribers, it would be easier when people drop some of these frequently asked questions for me just to reference a video. So that's kind of where I'm headed. But also within the comments, I'd be interested in any questions that you've wanted to ask me, but never had of a personal nature that would be something that would be in a frequently asked questions video. So I would appreciate any comments along that line. So thank you once again for stopping by, and hopefully I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Rabyd, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.